The hum of the training deck vibrated through Cadet Reyna Vale's boots as she stood at parade rest, eyes fixed forward. Around her, dozens of cadets, alien and human alike, lined up in military precision, their shadows stretching long under the cold white lights. The Interstellar Command Academy's corridors were sterile and imposing, carved from titanium and discipline. It was here, among the most elite of the Galactic Alliance's recruits, that Reyna had learned to bury fear beneath focus. But today, she could feel it rising. She didn't flinch as Commander Darzak stalked past her line. 8 feet tall, exoskeletal plating shimmering with a dull silver sheen, he moved with the coiled grace of a predator. His nostrils flared with disdain as he looked over the assembled cadets, his black eyes pausing on Reyna just a moment too long. "Another human girl?" he scoffed aloud, his voice a gravelly purr. "You'll snap like the last one." There were no laughs, but silence could echo louder than mockery. Reyna kept her posture firm. She'd grown used to the stares, the whispered bets. Humans were newcomers to the academy, considered weak, soft, emotionally erratic. She was the only human in her class of 64. That wasn't an honor. It was a warning. The simulation drill had been simple. Infiltrate, extract, escape. Reyna had done it faster and cleaner than any cadet that day, including Darzak. She hadn't celebrated. Victory made you visible. But Darzak had noticed, and in his world, superiority wasn't just expected. It was sacred. Later that night, the challenge came. He found her in mess hall, still in uniform, sipping bland nutrient broth at a corner table. His approach quieted the entire room. "Cadet Vale," he said, letting the words drip with mock courtesy. "Combat trial. Tomorrow. You and I. No weapons." Reyna stood slowly, setting her bowl aside. Her heart beat hard, but her face betrayed nothing. "You want to fight me because I beat your time?" Darzak leaned in, close enough for her to see the pale scar that split his upper mandible. "I want to remind you of your place." Around them, cadets murmured. Some were shocked, others delighted. Darzak rarely bothered with humans. When he did, it wasn't a fight. It was a message. Reyna gave a slow nod. "Accepted." He tilted his head in mock amusement. "Try not to break too early. It's boring when they don't last." The next morning came with a sterile scent of disinfectant and anticipation. Reyna stood alone in the combat prep chamber, her uniform folded neatly on the bench behind her. She wore only a regulation bodysuit now, thin enough for movement, thick enough to absorb bruises. She tied her hair back with calm precision, even as her pulse tried to pound through her ribcage. She thought of Earth, of home, of her mother's callous hands, her father's quiet pride, of the long nights spent training alone, studying the anatomy of every species in the Academy database, looking for patterns, for weaknesses. She remembered pain, too. The cracked ribs during her first week, the laughter when she cried out in front of the instructor. But she also remembered rising. Every time, when the doors opened, Reyna stepped into the combat hall. It was a cavern of steel, lined with cadets and instructors on every side. The overhead lights cast harsh shadows across the metallic floor. At the far end stood Darzak, already circling, his clawed feet scraping against the floor like a blade being sharpened. The fight wasn't until tomorrow, but the outcome had already begun forming in the minds of every observer. She walked to her mark and stood tall. Darzak grinned. "I look forward to humbling you." Reyna met his gaze. "You can't humble someone who doesn't care what you think." Gasps echoed across the chamber, but she didn't hear them. Her attention had narrowed to the creature in front of her. Not an icon, not an elite warrior, just muscle, speed, and ego. She could work with that. Across the hall, Commander Vec, a neutral arbiter from the Thal system, raised one hand. "Combat trial. Confirmed. Sunrise cycle. No tech, no allies, no surrender." Darzak nodded. Reyna didn't. As they left the hall, whispers swirled around her like mist. Some called her foolish, others brave, but none of them understood. This wasn't just a fight. It was a declaration. And whether she won or lost, Reyna knew something had already shifted. She wasn't the one being tested anymore. She was the one rewriting the rules. The training deck was transformed by dawn. Harsh lights flared against the polished metal floor, casting elongated shadows of the cadets who lined the walls in stiff silence. Overhead, the viewing platforms were packed with instructors and higher-ranking officers, their eyes cold and observant. Even here at the edge of deep space, where silence and steel reigned supreme, anticipation buzzed like static through the air. Raina Vale stood in the center of the combat circle, her breath calm, her muscles loose. She wore the same black bodysuit from training, unassuming, unadorned, but her presence was different, sharper, grounded. Her dark eyes flicked once toward the stands, registering the spectators not as threats but as irrelevance. They weren't the ones she had to beat. Across from her, Darzak was a living monolith, towering, armored in his species' natural plating. He rolled his shoulders and cracked his knuckles with casual menace. His lip curled in a grin that exposed serrated teeth. "You look smaller in the light," he said, voice like broken stone. "Are you sure you're not here to clean the floor?" Raina didn't answer. She tilted her head, studying him. Krellins were fast, brutally strong, but their upper body movements were slightly slower when pivoting on their rear leg. She'd watched him train. She knew. Commander Vex stepped forward, his voice amplified across the chamber. "This combat trial is sanctioned. No technology. No weapons. Victory by incapacitation or submission. Begin on my signal." A pause, then the sharp ring of a tone. Darzak charged. He moved like a freight engine, all momentum and fury. The crowd tensed as he raised a heavy fist, the size of Raina's torso, and swung in a downward arc. She sidestepped barely. The impact cratered the floor where she'd been, and she felt the vibration ripple through her bones. But she was already moving. She didn't try to match his strength. That would be suicide. Instead, she used what she had: speed, strategy, and a brutal understanding of anatomy. She ducked low, spinning on her heel, and drove a precision kick into the side of his knee. He stumbled but didn't fall. He grunted, more amused than hurt. "A tickle. Try again." He lashed out with a backhand. Raina ducked under it, slipping in close. Her hand struck his side, targeting a Krellin nerve bundle she'd studied for weeks. His body twitched involuntarily, but he recovered with alarming speed. Now he was angry. Darzak roared, lunging forward in a blur. This time he caught her. His massive hand closed around her upper arm like a clamp. Pain flared instantly, but she didn't panic. Instead, she pivoted inward, twisted, and brought her elbow up into his throat. The strike wasn't enough to drop him, but it startled him just long enough for her to break free. The spectators were silent. No jeers, no applause, just breath held and eyes wide. Raina knew she couldn't outlast him. This had to end quickly. She shifted her stance, grounding herself. Darzak snarled and lunged again. She let him come. At the last second, she dropped low and spun, sweeping his legs. His size worked against him. Momentum carried him forward. He crashed to the ground with a thunderous clang. And she was on him. She climbed his chest, planted one knee on his sternum, and delivered 3 sharp jabs to his exposed neck ridge. Each strike aimed for the nerve cluster beneath the plating. His limbs twitched. He tried to rise. Too late. She drove her palm upward into the base of his jaw, and his eyes rolled back. He went still. Raina stood, breathing hard but steady. Her hand was still raised, but there was no need for another strike. Darzak's body lay limp beneath her. Silence. Then Commander Vex's voice cut through. Incapacitated. "Victory, Cadet Raina Vale." A slow, stunned murmur rippled through the room, as if no one was sure what reality they'd just witnessed. Raina stepped back from her fallen opponent, chest rising and falling, and looked toward the crowd. She met no one's gaze. She didn't need their approval. She had her answer. Darzak stirred, groaning. As medics moved in, he opened his eyes and looked up at her, confused, disoriented, but not hateful. "Not yet." She nodded once, the gesture small, but not without respect. She didn't gloat. She didn't speak. Instead, she turned and walked off the platform as the crowd parted in silence. Behind her, History had just been rewritten, and ahead, something far more dangerous than Darzak waited in the dark. The aftermath carried a silence heavier than the battle itself. In the Academy's upper corridors, where the walls bore no scars but remembered everything, whispers circulated like smuggled contraband. Cadets who once ignored Reyna now gave her a wide berth or watched her with cautious eyes. Some bowed their heads, slightly in passing. Others stared with naked hostility. But no one laughed anymore. The infirmary lights were low, humming gently over Darzak's motionless form. He lay still on the bio-slab, his chest rising and falling with machine-assisted rhythm. Around him, monitors blinked in quiet defeat. Krellans were not known for weakness, or for losing. He stirred. The medtech, a small reptilian female from the Visari system, stepped back as he opened his eyes and groaned. His gaze drifted toward the ceiling, then narrowed as memory returned. He flexed his claws instinctively, then winced. "She beat me," he said, the words tasting sour. "Yes," the medic replied without sympathy. "Quite efficiently." His mouth opened, perhaps to argue, but nothing came. Instead, he stared ahead, silent. Something had shifted inside him, something unfamiliar and unwelcome. Doubt. Elsewhere in the command review hall, Reyna stood alone before a semicircle of ranking officers. The air was colder here, the silence more calculated. "She violated no rules," said Commander Vec. The outcome was clean. A sharp-featured Zethari female leaned forward, and yet disruptive. The Krellin are already filing diplomatic concerns. They're calling it a humiliation. Reyna's jaw tightened. "I fought under your laws. If that's humiliating, then perhaps the problem isn't mine." The room went still. Commander Vaylor, the human representative, cleared his throat. What Cadet Vale means is that her success should be viewed as a demonstration of the Academy's values. Merit over assumption. General Threx, a broad-chested Vorgan, exhaled deeply. "Be careful, Commander. One victory doesn't change centuries of balance." Reyna spoke before she could think better of it. Balance based on fears and stability. It's delay. That earned her a long, unreadable look. Then Vec nodded. She will not be penalized. In fact, her performance merits consideration for advanced tactical division. The words landed like thunder. Reyna blinked. She hadn't expected reward, just survival. When the hall emptied, Vaylor walked beside her in silence. Finally, he said, "You understand what you've done?" She nodded. "I've made myself a target." "No," he replied. "You've made yourself necessary. That's far more dangerous." Back in the barracks, her door slid open to reveal a mess. Someone had overturned her cot, scattered her belongings, and left deep claw marks in the walls. She stood in the doorway for a long time, expression unreadable, then stepped over the wreckage and began setting things right without a word. Later that evening, footsteps echoed behind her as she left the training simulator. She turned to find Darzak standing in the corridor, arms folded, face unreadable. A bruise colored the side of his jaw. "I didn't come to fight," he said. Reyna said nothing. "I've faced enemies stronger than me before," he continued, "but never one smarter. You fought with purpose." "I fought to prove I belonged," Reyna replied. "That's not the same." He gave a slow nod. "You did." For a moment, something passed between them. Acknowledgement, if not yet understanding. "If you wish," he said, "we can train together. No weapons, no ranks." She raised an eyebrow. "You sure your pride can handle it?" "Pride is what led to my defeat. I'd rather rebuild." She didn't answer right away, but she didn't say no. Word of their meeting spread. By the next week, Reyna's name wasn't whispered in corridors anymore. It was spoken aloud, sometimes with reverence, sometimes with unease. She began drawing others, humans, yes, but also outsiders from species overlooked and underestimated. A quiet coalition began to form, not formal, not declared, but present. In the darkness beyond the solar barrier, threat loomed. The fractured Arcani's dominion had begun rallying fleets, predators stirred by the scent of internal weakness in the Galactic Alliance. The Academy's upper tiers knew this, and so did the officers watching Reyna's rise. They didn't just need a soldier. They needed a symbol. In her dorm, late at night, Reyna stared at the transmission on her datapad. A classified request. Frontline deployment to a reconnaissance task force beyond the Orion Rift. Highly dangerous. Optional, for now. She stared at the message for a long time. The Academy hadn't broken her. It had forged her. But outside these walls, something worse than trials or trials waited. Still, her answer was already forming. She was done surviving. She was ready to lead. The dropship tore through the upper atmosphere like a blade through silk, its hull trembling under the strain of re-entry. Beyond the cockpit glass, the world below unfolded. Scorched plains cratered valleys, and the twisted wreckage of long-forgotten outposts. This was no training simulation. This was the Arcani's frontier, and it was very real. Reyna sat strapped in, her hands resting steady on her thighs despite the turbulence. Across from her, the squad watched her in silence. For soldiers from 4 different species, all veterans, all older, none of them spoke until the turbulence subsided. "You're smaller than I imagined," said Zur, a hulking Vorn with tusks like carved obsidian. Reyna met his gaze. "I hit harder than I look." A chuckle rumbled through the squad. The ice cracked. The mission was simple on paper. Recon an abandoned Alliance listening post, determine its status, and extract any remaining intel. But everyone aboard knew the Arcani's dominion rarely left anything unfinished. The risk was written in their orders and in the silence that followed. As they disembarked, dust and wind assaulted them, coating their gear in gray grime. The station loomed ahead, half collapsed, its upper tiers melted by plasma fire, antennas bent like wilted thorns. Reyna raised her rifle, though she knew the odds of a straight firefight were slim. The real danger here didn't shoot from cover. It waited, patient, calculating. Inside, the air was stagnant and thin. The lights flickered with erratic pulses, painting the interior in strobe-like flashes. Bodies lay crumpled in corners, their uniforms faded and torn. There were no signs of struggle, just silence. Reyna crouched beside a terminal, fingers flying across the interface. Corrupted files, half-erased records, but enough remained. She saw them. Enemy logs, broadcast intercepts. The Dominion hadn't just attacked. They'd studied the station, mapped its routines, dissected its vulnerabilities. They were learning, she muttered, testing response times, measuring patterns. Zur growled low in his throat. Why destroy the post if they already got what they wanted? Reyna stood slowly, her eyes narrowing as she scanned the room. Because they wanted us to come see it. This place wasn't wiped. It was staged. A pulse echoed to the floor, soft, rhythmic, mechanical. The trap triggered. The far wall exploded inward, sending shrapnel and debris hurtling through the corridor. Shapes poured through the smoke, sleek, jagged silhouettes with glowing eyes and razor limbs. Not drones, not soldiers, something in between. The squad sprang into motion, returning fire in a blaze of muzzle flashes and shouted commands. Reyna moved with lethal precision, her rifle snapping from target to target. But they kept coming. 2 of the enemy flank left. She dropped to one knee, fired twice, then rolled to avoid the sweep of a bladed arm. Zur tackled one, crushing it beneath his mass, but took a wound across his shoulder. Another of the squad went down screaming. They had seconds, maybe less. Fall back. Reyna barked. Rear corridor now. She laid down cover fire as the others retreated, emptying her last magazine before switching to her sidearm. The Dominion constructs didn't speak, didn't pause. They advanced like a tide of hunger. Reyna backpedaled, ducked through the broken doorway, and sealed it with a manual override. It wouldn't hold long, but it was enough. In the dark, panting and bleeding, Zur looked at her with something like awe. You knew this wasn't recon. You expected a fight. I expected worse, she said. And this isn't over. They found a narrow shaft leading to the station sublevel, a backup comms relay buried deep beneath the surface. As they descended, Reyna transmitted a compressed data burst command. enemy composition, tactical patterns, fallback location. She doubted it would reach them. As they reached the subchamber, a low hum greeted them. The relay still functioned, barely. Reyna began a hard reset, her hands swift despite the ache in her arms. "We hold here," she said. "They'll breach soon." Zer glanced at the others. "We're down 2. Ammo's almost gone. Odds are worse than bad." Reyna didn't blink. "Then we make it cost them." The silence that followed wasn't fear. It was acceptance. It was clarity. When the first explosion rocked the entry shaft, Reyna rose to her feet, rifle raised, eyes locked on the approaching storm. In that moment, she didn't feel small. She didn't feel young. She felt ready. The constructs poured in like shadows with teeth, and the squad met them head-on. For every second they held, another fragment of data transmitted, another sliver of truth carried upward through the dark. By the time the reinforcements arrived 3 hours later, the relay was destroyed. The squad was gone, but the message had gotten through. And Reyna Vale's name would never be whispered again. It would be remembered